Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we continue following the story of James, picking up from what happened in the previous episode, where James's proposal to Diep was spoken in an incredibly warm and intimate setting. Under soft lights, surrounded by a familiar atmosphere and witnessed by the people closest to them, that moment was neither loud nor extravagant, yet it carried an overwhelming depth of emotion. Everything unfolded slowly, allowing every glance, every breath, and every heartbeat of the two people standing at a major turning point in their lives to become clearer than ever. The ring James placed on Diep's finger in that moment was far more than a piece of jewelry or a customary gesture. It carried a promise he had held on to for a long time, a declaration of the love they had protected and carried through countless challenges together. When the ring finally rested on Diep's hand, it was not only her acceptance of James's feelings, but also a marker of a profound decision, the decision to step into an entirely new chapter, where happiness and hardship would walk side by side. Even as that moment was filled with warmth and hope, both James and Diep understood clearly that obstacles still lay ahead. Unresolved family issues, lingering opposition, and invisible pressures continued to exist quietly in the background. Yet precisely in that seemingly fragile moment, their trust in their choice grew stronger. That proposal, though taking place in a small and private space, felt like a silent affirmation that they were ready to hold hands and move forward together, no matter what awaited them. For James, the image of Diep smiling under the gentle lights, with little Nie standing nearby, became etched deeply into his memory. In that instant, he truly believed that a peaceful future was beginning to open, one where the three of them could build a real home together. A future with no need to hide, no need to live in uncertainty or fear, but a life that truly resembled what a family should be. After the proposal ended, the lingering emotions gradually gave way to more serious reflections. James understood that love alone was not enough. To protect Diep, to give her a clear and rightful place in his life, and to give Nie a true home, he needed to make an important decision for his own future. This was not an impulsive choice, nor a fleeting reaction to heightened emotions, but the result of many sleepless nights filled with thought and inner struggle. More than anyone else, James knew that his father had always opposed this relationship. That opposition was not just spoken aloud, it had become a deep-rooted and persistent barrier over a long period of time. He understood that if he chose to continue down this path, he would face many hardships, possibly even fractures within his family. The road ahead would certainly not be smooth, and challenges could arise at any moment. And yet, after everything he had been through, James made his choice. He decided to hold a wedding. To him, this was not merely a ceremony or a formal celebration. It was the only way to give Diep a clear status, to ensure she would no longer stand in an ambiguous place in his life. It was also his way of declaring to everyone that Diep was the person he chose, the woman he intended to walk with for the rest of his journey. More than that, this decision came from his desire to give little Nie a complete and loving home. To James and Diep, Nie was not simply an adopted child, but an inseparable part of the small family they were trying to build. They loved her as their own flesh and blood, a bond that connected them in a deeply special way. James understood that only when everything was placed where it truly belonged, when their family was clearly recognized, could Nie grow up surrounded by love, security, and protection. The decision to organize a wedding, therefore, was not just James's personal choice. It was a step filled with responsibility, determination, and sacrifices he was willing to accept. In his heart, his faith in Diep, in their love, and in the small family they envisioned continued to grow quietly, even as the future remained uncertain and full of unknowns. James prepared his wedding in the simplest way possible, almost stripping away all the extravagance people usually expect from such an important day. There was no grand venue, no elaborate arrangements, no luxurious details meant for show. Everything was contained within a small ceremony, quiet enough for every emotion to surface clearly, intimate enough for everyone present to truly feel the meaning of the moment. For James, what mattered had never been the scale or outward appearance, but the sincerity of the day and the people standing beside him. The guest list was therefore very short, almost sparse compared to an ordinary wedding. Only Hung, Tuca, Lee, Sam, his mother, and a few longtime friends who had stood by James since the most turbulent days were present. They were not merely friends or acquaintances, but people who had witnessed nearly the entire stormy journey between James and Diep. From conflicts that once seemed impossible to mend, to long stretches of painful silence, to moments when both had stood at difficult crossroads, everyone present that day carried a deeply personal memory of their story. No one came simply to attend a ceremony. They came because they understood exactly what James and Diep had endured to be standing together in this moment. Some observed quietly, some smiled softly as they looked at the couple, but all shared the same feeling: this small ceremony held a meaning far greater than its modest appearance. It was recognition of a path that had never been smooth, proof that some relationships are built on perseverance, conscious choice, and acceptance. James's mother sat quietly in one corner, her eyes following every moment of the ceremony without many words. The emotion on her face was clear, not loud or dramatic, but deep and restrained. Her presence, though silent, meant more to James than anything else. He understood that under the circumstances, her being there was not something to be taken for granted. It was a quiet form of support, a decision to stand by her son even when many things around them remained unresolved. James's longtime friends felt the same way. No one rushed to speak or tried to create a lively atmosphere. Instead, they chose to stand close, observe, and share the moment with quiet respect. Everyone understood that this ceremony was not just a simple celebration, but the result of many difficult decisions and internal struggles that James and Diep had had to overcome on their own. Yet, amid the warmth and the presence of those closest to them, there was still an absence that could not be ignored. It was the absence of James's father. The person who should have been there on the most important day of his son's life was nowhere to be seen. No message, no sign of change. His silence became a lingering void that anyone could sense, even though no one spoke of it aloud. That absence did not need to be mentioned, it was visible in the eyes of those around, in brief, unexpected pauses, and in James's own emotions. He understood better than anyone the reason behind that choice. It was not new, nor was it a sudden shock. The sadness had existed for a long time, quiet, familiar, and inseparable from the path he had chosen. James did not blame or attempt to justify anything. In his heart, that absence was both a sorrow and something he had long prepared himself to face. Rather than letting it dominate the moment, he chose to focus on the present, on the people beside him and on the decision he had made. For him, moving forward, even without one important presence, was unavoidable if he wanted to protect what truly mattered. When the wedding ceremony officially began, the atmosphere in the small space became both tense and expectant. With so few people present, the room was quiet enough that even the smallest movement felt significant. When Diep appeared, all eyes turned toward her. She did not wear an elaborate gown, nor heavy makeup. Instead, she appeared simple, almost unadorned, and it was precisely that simplicity that made her emotions more visible than ever. On Diep's face, happiness was genuine, but not entirely complete. Her eyes shimmered with emotion, mixed with a trace of anxiety she could not fully hide. It was the feeling of someone standing at the threshold of a new chapter, where happiness was no longer just an emotion, but came hand in hand with responsibility and uncertainty. Diep said nothing, but the way she took a deep breath, the way she walked slowly forward, spoke volumes. James stood waiting ahead, his eyes never leaving her. As she reached him, he extended his hand and held hers tightly. That gesture was not for show, nor did it require words, yet it was strong enough to offer reassurance. It was a silent reminder that Diep was not alone, that every worry and every challenge ahead would be faced together, one step at a time. The ceremony therefore carried a very distinct atmosphere. Small, yet warm and sincere. There was no loud music, no prolonged applause, only the quiet but meaningful presence of people who truly cared. Everyone there held a quiet belief that after everything James and Diep had been through, this moment was not a coincidence. In that instant, time seemed to slow. Shared glances, gentle smiles, and subtle nods of understanding wove together into an atmosphere difficult to name. Everyone believed that as long as they stood firmly in this moment, as long as they held on to each other in the present, the road ahead, though still filled with uncertainty, was opening in its own way, quietly, and full of promise. However, just as the ceremony was slowly approaching its most important moment, the moment everyone was holding their breath for, the sacred exchange of vows, an unexpected incident shattered the stillness. The door, which had remained closed since the beginning of the ceremony, suddenly swung open, its sound echoing sharply through the otherwise quiet space. In an instant, everyone's attention was pulled in the same direction, accompanied by a sense of unease that had not yet taken shape. James's father stood at the doorway, his posture rigid, his expression cold, followed by several people behind him. From that very moment, the atmosphere in the room changed completely. Without a single word being spoken, everyone present could feel the tension and instability radiating from the newcomers. This was not an entrance that carried blessings or reconciliation. It was more like an icy gust crashing into the room, extinguishing the fragile sense of peace that had only just been formed. Only moments earlier, James and Diep had been standing face to face, hands clasped, immersed in anticipation and hope. Yet in the blink of an eye, those emotions were abruptly cut off. The warmth drained from the space, replaced by a heavy, suffocating tension. Anxious glances began to appear, movements grew hesitant, and the initial excitement quickly turned into confusion and dread. Harsh words soon rang out, breaking the solemnity of the ceremony. They were not shouted, but each sentence, each word, carried enough weight to wound and to shock everyone present. Disruptive actions followed one after another, turning the small, once peaceful space into chaos. Those in attendance were too stunned to react, left standing in silence as they witnessed the unfolding scene with disbelief. The ceremony, prepared with such sincerity and hope, began to unravel. Rituals left unfinished, words left unsaid, everything hung suspended in midair. The fragile calm that had been built through so much effort was swiftly destroyed, replaced by an overwhelming sense of emptiness and disorder. Diep stood frozen for a moment, as if unable to fully grasp what was happening. When reality finally sank in, her emotions broke free. Pain, hurt, and helplessness surged together until she could no longer contain them. Diep burst into tears, her sobs uncontrollable, her voice trembling as she tried to speak. Even as her throat tightened and her words were nearly choked off by emotion, she still forced herself to step forward, trying to stop what was happening. She did not retreat. She did not turn away. In that moment, Diep gathered every last bit of courage she had to face James's father, fully aware of how fragile her position was. Her words came out broken, interrupted by sobs, but they carried all the sincerity and pain she was enduring. This was not only her own suffering, it was the anguish of watching the happiness she and James had fought so hard to build collapse before her eyes. James was torn apart. He stood between the most important people in his life, each pulling him in a different direction. On one side was Diep, the woman he loved, trembling in tears, needing him more than ever. On the other side was his father, the man who had raised him, yet also the one now destroying this pivotal moment. James barely knew what to do as his thoughts tangled and emotions collided. Instinctively, he tried to move toward Diep, driven by the need to protect her. Yet at the same time, his father's presence made it impossible for him to completely turn away. James felt the tension tightening around him, each breath growing heavier. Every possible choice in that moment carried wounds that might never heal, and that realization trapped him in a painful, inescapable conflict. Amid the chaos, no one noticed that James's mother was slowly turning pale. She struggled to remain standing, her eyes filled with shock as she watched the scene unfold. The shock was too sudden, too overwhelming for her to bear. Surrounded by heated words and suffocating disorder, she suddenly collapsed, her body falling helplessly to the ground. For a brief moment, everything seemed to freeze. The sound of her fall startled a few people, but the chaos did not immediately cease. James's mother lay motionless, her face drained of color, plunging those around her into a new wave of panic. It all happened too quickly, too unexpectedly, like a crushing blow to everyone's spirit. The ceremony, which should have been at its most sacred moment, had turned into a scene of emotional wreckage. Tears, shock, fear, and pain intertwined, casting a suffocating heaviness over the space. No one thought of the rituals anymore. No one remembered the vows that had yet to be spoken. All that remained was chaos, shattered emotions, and people standing in the midst of a crisis far greater than anything they had ever anticipated. Everything happened too fast, so fast that no one present had the time to prepare themselves or fully comprehend what was unfolding. In just a brief span of moments, the wedding space that had been filled with solemnity, warmth, and anticipation was completely overturned. The positive emotions that had only just begun to settle were swept away by the sudden chaos, leaving shock clearly written across every face. James's closest friends were the first to react. Almost instinctively, they rushed in to intervene, trying to keep distance between those overwhelmed by emotion, hoping the situation would not spiral further out of control. The already small space felt even more cramped with hurried footsteps, frantic gestures, and voices calling out in concern. Everyone's eyes reflected confusion, no one knew exactly what to do next, only that if they didn't act immediately, things could become far more serious. Amid the turmoil, attention quickly turned to James's mother. When it became clear that she had collapsed and was unresponsive, fear spread instantly. Several people hurried to her side, calling her name in desperation and checking her condition, while others panicked and searched for help. A sense of urgency engulfed the room, completely extinguishing whatever remained of the wedding atmosphere. Rapid footsteps echoed, anxious voices overlapped, and the air grew heavy and suffocating. No one had the presence of mind to think about rituals, vows, or anything else. In that moment, there was only one concern: James's mother. The decision to take her to the hospital was made almost immediately. Everyone moved in frantic coordination, supporting her, calling out instructions, trying to reassure one another, even as they themselves were overwhelmed with fear. While a group followed the vehicle rushing James's mother to the hospital, the space left behind remained heavy with tension. Those who stayed turned their attention to Diep. After everything that had just happened, her mental and emotional strength had reached its limit. Her body trembled uncontrollably, her hands icy cold, her breathing broken and shallow, as though standing upright required every ounce of effort she had left. Tears streamed down her face, her eyes swollen and red from the flood of emotions compressed into such a short time. Diep could barely walk on her own. She was gently escorted out of the wedding space, a place that had once represented hope and emotional refuge for her, but now felt suffocating and painful. Someone carefully supported her, others stayed close, offering soft words of comfort, though they all knew how impossible it was to truly ease her pain in that moment. Reassuring words were spoken, but they seemed to drift away, unable to reach the shattered emotions within her. When she was finally taken somewhere to rest, Diep collapsed into complete exhaustion, both physical and emotional. What had just happened felt like a nightmare she could not escape. The wedding she had placed so much hope in, believing it would mark the beginning of a new life, had instead become a deeply haunting memory. Every image and sound from the ceremony etched itself into her mind, forever tied to tears, shock, and heartbreaking collapse. The wedding venue was soon left behind in disarray. Decorations remained untouched, rituals unfinished, everything stood still like silent witnesses to an event no one had wanted. The dream wedding, built from hope, faith, and determination, vanished in a single day. In its place remained confusion, fear, and emotional wounds that had no time to heal, not only for James and Diep, but for everyone who had been there. James stood amid it all, barely aware of time passing. Everything around him felt blurred, as if covered by a thick fog. Part of his mind was fixed on his mother, filled with worry and fear over her condition and what might be happening at the hospital. The other part could not let go of the image of Diep in tears, fragile and deeply wounded after a shock he himself had been powerless to stop. Conflicting emotions crashed over him all at once, leaving James utterly exhausted and hollow. He didn't know what to prioritize, didn't know how to protect everyone who mattered most in his life. The choices ahead appeared vague yet unbearably heavy, as though every decision he might make would bring with it another loss, another wound that could never truly be healed. What happens next remains a profound question. What is the current condition of James's mother? Will she recover from such a devastating shock? How will Diep face the emotional trauma layered upon her in such a short time? And James, caught between family and the woman he loves, what choice will he make for the next chapter of his life? All of this lies ahead, waiting to be revealed in the next episode. The journey of James and Diep will certainly not be easy, filled with upheaval, trials, and life-altering decisions. If you don't want to miss what happens next, continue walking alongside the channel. Don't forget to leave a comment sharing your thoughts and feelings about what just happened, and be sure to like the video to support the story and follow the upcoming episodes.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình. Cảm ơn mọi người rất là nhiều vì tạm biệt mọi người.